The early morning sun streamed through the massive windows of Metropolitan International Airport, creating golden paths across the polished floors. 16-year-old twins Zara and Zuri Johnson stood at the check-in counter of Skyway Airlines, their matching passports and boarding passes held out confidently. They had been planning this spring break trip to Paris for months, saving allowance money, working weekend jobs at their aunt's bakery, and even learning basic French phrases from online videos. "I can't wait to see the Eiffel Tower at sunset," Zuri whispered to her sister, bouncing slightly on her toes. Her braids, adorned with small wooden beads that clicked softly when she moved, framed a face bright with anticipation. Zara nodded, more reserved, but equally excited. "And the art museums. I've got a whole list from my art teacher." She adjusted the small sketchbook tucked into her carry-on, filled with drawings she hoped would be inspired by the great works they would see. The twins had arrived 2 hours early, just as their father had instructed. He was always particular about airport timing, insisting that punctuality was a sign of respect and good planning. Their parents couldn't join them on this trip. Dad had important meetings he couldn't reschedule, and Mom was finishing a major project at her architecture firm, but they had agreed the girls were responsible enough for this adventure. After all, they were honor students who had already traveled internationally with their school's cultural exchange program last year. The airline employee behind the counter, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a name tag reading Thomas, frowned as he studied their documents. His fingers tapped rapidly on his keyboard, his frown deepening with each click. "Is something wrong?" Zara asked, her stomach tightening with the first flickers of worry. Thomas cleared his throat. "I'm afraid your documentation is insufficient for travel today." The twins exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean?" Zuri asked. "We have our passports, boarding passes, and the hotel information. Dad helped us double-check everything last night." Around them, the airport hummed with activity. A family with 2 small children was quickly processed at the next counter. An elderly couple smiled with relief as they received their boarding passes. A businessman chatted on his phone while his documents were checked and approved in less than a minute. "The system is flagging an issue," Thomas said without looking up. "You'll need additional verification for minors traveling alone." "But we have our parents' permission letter," Zara said, pulling out a notarized document from her travel folder. "It has all their contact information and everything." Thomas barely glanced at the paper. "This isn't properly formatted for international travel." "But we use the template from your airline's website," Zuri protested, her voice still polite but growing firmer. She pulled up the website on her phone, showing him the exact page. "See? We followed all the requirements." Thomas pursed, his lips looking past them to the growing line. "Young ladies, I don't have time to argue. The decision is final. You should have known better than to try traveling without proper arrangements. Please step aside for the next customers." Zara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as people in line began to stare. "Can we speak to a supervisor, please?" she asked, working hard to keep her voice steady. "Supervisor will tell you the same thing," Thomas replied, already gesturing for the next person in line to step forward. "Maybe your parents can book you on a flight tomorrow if they come with the correct paperwork." As they reluctantly stepped away from the counter, Zuri noticed something that made her stomach sink further. Every person who had been processed while they waited was now heading toward security, and none of them looked like the twins. In fact, as they scanned the departures area, they noticed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. "Zara," Zuri whispered, nudging her sister. "Look over there." Near the security checkpoint, a black family with teenage boys was being pulled aside for what appeared to be a random secondary screening. The boys' faces showed the same mixture of confusion and growing understanding that the twins were feeling. "This isn't about our paperwork at all, is it?" Zara said quietly, her voice barely audible above the airport announcements. Zuri took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. "I'm going to record what's happening," she said. "Dad always says to document everything." Their carefully packed suitcases, decorated with Paris-themed stickers and colorful luggage tags, now sat uselessly beside them. Zara had spent hours the night before organizing her outfits in packing cubes imagining how she would look standing in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. Zuri had carefully wrapped her camera in bubble wrap, excited to practice photography skills on the charming Parisian streets. Now they stood in the middle of the bustling terminal, watching as other passengers streamed past them toward their adventures. A group of teenagers about their age laughed as they headed to their gate, their path unobstructed. "What do we do now?" Zara asked, fighting back tears of frustration. Zuri squared her shoulders, a familiar determination settling over her features, the same expression she wore before debate competitions and track meets. "We call Dad." A woman in a business suit who had been standing nearby approached them cautiously. "Excuse me," she said in a low voice. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm an attorney and what just happened doesn't seem right." She discreetly handed them a business card. "Your instinct to document this is good. Don't let them get away with it." The twins nodded their thanks, a new sense of purpose replacing their initial shock. They moved to a quiet corner near the large windows overlooking the runway, where planes took off into the clear blue sky. Planes they should have been on. Zara pulled out her phone, her finger hovering over her father's contact information. Their dad wasn't just any parent. He was someone whose voice made people listen, whose presence commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. "He's going to fix this," Zuri said with absolute certainty. "And not just for us." Zara nodded as she pressed the call button. "This isn't going to happen to anyone else," she agreed, her voice growing stronger. "Not if we have anything to say about it." Zuri held her phone steady, trying to keep her hand from shaking as she recorded. The check-in area buzzed with activity around them, travelers rushing past with rolling suitcases and carry-ons, the typical airport soundtrack of announcements and conversations filling the air. But for the twins, time seemed to slow down as they processed what was happening. "Make sure you get a wide shot," Zara whispered, her eyes scanning the departure hall. "Not just Thomas, but the whole check-in area." Zuri nodded, adjusting her angle. The screen of her phone captured what their eyes had already noticed, a clear pattern unfolding across the terminal. At security, a black family with 2 small children was being directed to a separate line for additional screening. Their suitcases were opened on the table, contents examined piece by piece while the parents tried to calm their increasingly upset children. Nearby, an elderly black couple was being questioned about their prescription medications, despite having proper documentation from their doctor. Meanwhile, other travelers moved through security with minimal interaction, their bags sliding through scanners without additional inspection, their boarding passes checked with quick nods and smiles. "This isn't a coincidence," Zuri said softly, lowering her phone after capturing enough footage. Her voice wasn't angry, not yet. Instead, it carried the weight of a realization that felt both new and achingly familiar. "Remember what happened to cousin Darius at the mall last summer?" Zara nodded. Their older cousin had been followed by security guards while shopping for clothes, despite being a college student with his own credit card and no history of trouble. Their parents had sat them down afterward for what they called the talk. Not about birds and bees, but about moving through spaces where your skin color might make others view you differently. "Dad told us this might happen someday," Zara said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "He said we'd need to be twice as prepared, twice as polite, and twice as persistent." The twins had always been good students. They understood research, evidence, and logical arguments. Now they applied that same analytical thinking to their situation. "Let's write down exactly what happened," Zara suggested, pulling out her travel journal, the one she'd planned to fill with sketches of Parisian cafes and notes about French history. Instead, she began documenting their experience in careful detail: the time, the employee's name, the exact words used, the paperwork they had provided. As Zuri dictated and Zara wrote, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes and a rolling briefcase approached them. She had been standing a few spots behind them in line and had witnessed the entire exchange. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but kind. "I couldn't help noticing what happened. My name is Dr. Chen. I'm a professor of civil rights law at State University." The twins looked up, surprised by the interruption but grateful for the friendly face. What they did wasn't right, Dr. Chen continued. I've traveled with my students, groups of teenagers, many times, and I've never seen this level of scrutiny for the proper paperwork. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, handing it to Zara. This is the contact information for a colleague who specializes in transportation discrimination cases. She might be able to help. Thank you, Zuri said, taking the card and tucking it carefully into her phone case. Dr. Chen glanced around, then leaned closer. Don't let them dismiss you, she said quietly. You have rights as passengers. And what's happening here? She gestured subtly toward the security checkpoint where another black traveler was being pulled aside. Is a pattern that needs to be addressed. After Dr. Chen continued to her gate, the twins found a quiet corner near a coffee shop. The smell of fresh pastries, which earlier would have excited them as a preview of French bakeries, now went unnoticed as they huddled together on a bench. Do you think we should call that lawyer? Zara asked, looking at the card. Zuri shook her head, slowly. Not yet, let's call Dad first. Their father wasn't just their parent, he was their strongest advocate. When Zuri had been overlooked for advanced math placement despite her test scores, he had gone to the school board. When Zara's art was left out of a district exhibition, despite winning a regional prize, he had asked the right questions to the right people. He never raised his voice or made threats. He simply made people see things they were choosing to ignore. He always says that sometimes people need help seeing what's right in front of them, Zara said, scrolling to their father's contact information. Before pressing call, they watched as a teenage girl about their age, blonde, wearing a designer backpack, approached the same check-in counter. Thomas smiled at her, checked her paperwork with a cursory glance, and sent her on her way with a cheerful, "Enjoy Paris." The twins exchanged glances, a silent communication that had served them well since childhood. They didn't need words to understand what they were both feeling, the sharp sting of unfairness, the heaviness of recognition, and underneath it all, a growing determination. I'm sending Dad the video first, Zuri said, her fingers moving quickly across her phone screen, so he knows exactly what we're dealing with. Zara nodded, watching as other travelers continued to flow through the airport, many of them teenagers on spring break trips just like them. She thought about the French phrases they had practiced, the outfits they had planned for each day, the carefully saved spending money in their travel wallets. We're still going to Paris, she said with quiet certainty. But this isn't just about our trip anymore. Zuri finished sending the video and looked up, her expression shifting from hurt to resolve. No, it's not, she agreed. This is about making sure no one else gets treated this way. As Zara pressed the call button, the twins straightened their shoulders, their posture reflecting the inner strength that had been nurtured by parents who had prepared them for this moment. Not by teaching them to expect unfairness, but by showing them how to stand up against it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, their father's deep, reassuring voice answered. Dad, Zuri said, her voice calm despite everything. Something's happened at the airport, and we need your help to make it right, not just for us, but for everyone. In a gleaming downtown office building 40 miles away, David Johnson sat at the head of a long conference table. The quarterly investment meeting was reaching its conclusion, with graphs and projections displayed on the wall-mounted screens. As Chief Executive Officer of Heritage Investment Group, these meetings were a regular part of his schedule, important, but routine. What wasn't routine was the vibration of his personal phone. David had a strict policy about phones during meetings, but his daughter's trip to Paris was the one exception he'd made today. He glanced down discreetly to see Zara's name on the screen, and a knot immediately formed in his stomach. They should have been in the air by now. Excuse me, he said, rising from his chair. The other executives nodded respectfully as he stepped out into the hallway, his polished shoes silent against the thick carpet. Zara, is everything all right? He asked, his deep voice tight with concern. Through the phone, he could hear the noise of the airport in the background. Then came his daughter's voice, controlled but with an undercurrent of emotion he recognized immediately. Dad, we've been denied boarding, Zara explained. The agent says our documentation isn't sufficient, but we have everything you helped us prepare. The exact forms from the airline website. David listened carefully as Zara explained the situation, his expression growing more serious with each detail. As a father, his first instinct was protective anger. As a businessman who had navigated corporate America for 20 years, his mind was already analyzing strategies. Zuri sent you a video, Zara continued. It's not just us, Dad. There's a pattern here. I'm looking at it now, David replied, opening the message on his phone. The video his daughters had sent showed exactly what they described. The clear difference in treatment between passengers, the dismissive attitude of the gate agent, the random selection patterns that didn't look random at all. David took a deep breath. He had prepared his daughters for moments like this, had hoped they wouldn't face them, but knew better than to leave them unprepared. What he hadn't told them was that his investment firm held a significant position in the parent company that owned Skyway Airlines. It was part of a transportation sector portfolio he had built over the past 5 years, representing nearly 20% of their holdings. Are you both okay? He asked first, prioritizing his daughter's well-being over everything else. We're fine, Zuri answered, having taken the phone from her sister. Just upset and... She paused, searching for the right word. Disappointed. That single word, disappointed, hit David harder than any angry outburst could have. His daughters weren't naive. They understood the world they lived in, but they still believed things should be fair, that rules should be applied equally. And they were right. Stay where you are, he instructed. I'm going to make some calls. Send me the name of the gate agent and your booking reference. After getting the details, David ended the call and returned to the conference room. The executives looked up expectantly as he entered. I need to cut this meeting short, he announced. Wilson, can you wrap up the remaining points? His chief financial officer nodded but looked concerned. Everything okay, David? No, David replied honestly. But it will be. He gathered his tablet and papers, then addressed the room. Our quarterly projections look strong, but I'm reminded today that numbers don't tell the whole story about a company's health. True performance is measured by integrity, consistency, and fairness in operations. The executives exchanged confused glances as David continued. Starting next quarter, I want ethics audits included in all our investment reports. How companies treat their customers matters as much as how they manage their money. With that statement hanging in the air, David left the room and walked to his private office. His assistant looked up with surprise as he entered. Claire, I need you to set up an emergency call with the board of Transglobal Holdings, he said, naming the parent company of Skyway Airlines. Tell them it's regarding a serious operational issue affecting Skyway. And book me a car to Metropolitan International Airport immediately. Sir, you have the fundraiser dinner tonight, Claire reminded him. Cancel it, David said firmly. Family emergency. Once alone in his office, David didn't waste time. First, he sent an email to each member of Transglobal's board, people he had golfed with, dined with, negotiated with over the years. The message was brief and direct. An urgent matter regarding discriminatory practices at Skyway Airlines requires immediate attention. My firm is prepared to divest our entire position in Transglobal Holdings by market open tomorrow, unless this situation is addressed within the hour. Video evidence attached. Next, he called the chief operating officer of Skyway directly, a woman who had once worked for him before moving to the airline industry. Linda, it's David Johnson, he said when she answered. We have a situation that needs your personal attention. He explained what had happened to his daughters, his voice professional but with an edge that left no doubt about his seriousness. This isn't just about my family, he concluded. The video my daughter sent shows a clear pattern. How many other travelers have faced this who didn't have the means or connections to fight back? On the other end of the line, Linda was silent for a moment. I'm looking at the footage now, David. This is troubling, to say the least. Troubling. Doesn't begin to cover it, David replied. I want the head of customer service and the airport manager at the terminal in 20 minutes. I'll be there in 30. And Linda, this gets fixed today, but the real work starts tomorrow. My daughters don't want special treatment. They want the same treatment everyone deserves. After ending the call, David stood at his office window overlooking the city. In the reflection of the glass, he saw himself. The tailored suit, the confident posture that had carried him through boardrooms and business deals. But he also saw the father whose daughters had just faced something he couldn't protect them from. His phone buzzed with incoming messages, board members responding to his email, executives wanting to know what was happening, Linda confirming that the airport team was being assembled. As he gathered his things to leave, David thought about the conversations he'd had with his daughters over the years. The careful explanations about how the world might see them differently, the strategies for navigating spaces that weren't always welcoming, the importance of standing up not just for themselves, but for others. Today, his daughters had done exactly as he'd taught them. They'd stayed calm, gathered evidence, and sought help when needed. They hadn't just accepted unfair treatment. They'd recognized the larger pattern and were determined to address it. As his car pulled up outside the building, David's phone rang again. This time, it was the chairman of Transglobal Holdings himself. David, the chairman began, his voice cautious. I've seen the video. This isn't what our company stands for. Then prove it, David replied simply as he stepped into the car. I'll be at the airport in 25 minutes. By then, I want to know exactly how you're going to make this right. Not just for my daughters, but for every passenger who deserves fair treatment. As the car pulled away from the curb, David sent a quick text to his daughters. On my way. You did the right thing. This stops today. Zara and Zuri sat on a bench near their gate, still processing everything that had happened. Around them, the airport continued its busy rhythm, announcements echoing overhead, travelers rushing to make connections, children chasing each other down the wide corridors. It had been 40 minutes since they'd called their father. Do you think he's really coming here? Zuri asked, checking her phone again. No new messages. Zara nodded confidently. You know, Dad, when he says he's on his way, he means it. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the check-in counter, where they'd been denied boarding earlier. A group of people in suits had arrived, moving with the purposeful stride of those used to giving orders rather than taking them. At the center was a tall woman, with a severe bob haircut and a tablet clutched in her hand. That's the Skyway logo. On her pin, Zuri whispered, nudging her sister. Before they could speculate further, Zara's phone buzzed with a text from their father. Look to your left. The twins turned simultaneously to see their father walking toward them, his presence commanding attention even in the crowded terminal. Despite the situation, they couldn't help but smile. David Johnson had that effect on people, an air of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself loudly. Dad, they called in unison, standing to meet him. David embraced his daughters tightly, then held them at arm's length to look them over. Are you both okay? We're fine, Zara assured him, though the slight tremble in her voice suggested otherwise. Just mad, Zuri added with characteristic directness. David nodded, understanding both what was said and unsaid. That's fair. I'd be mad too. He gestured toward the group of suits still gathered at the counter. The airline executives are here. They want to speak with us. As they approached, the woman with the bob haircut stepped forward. Mr. Johnson, I'm Patricia Reynolds, Chief Customer Officer for Skyway Airlines. Her tone was professionally apologetic, but her eyes betrayed genuine concern. I want to personally apologize to your daughters for their experience today. David's expression remained neutral. I think there's more to discuss than just apologies, Ms. Reynolds. Patricia nodded. Absolutely. If you and your daughters would join us in our airport office, we can talk privately. The twins exchanged glances, silently communicating as they often did. Their father caught the look and placed a reassuring hand on each of their shoulders. Whatever happens next is up to you two, he told them quietly. This is your experience. I'm here to support your decisions. Zuri straightened her shoulders. We want to talk to them. Zara nodded in agreement. But not just about us, about everyone. Their father's eyes shone with pride as he turned back to Patricia. Lead the way. The Skyway office was a stark contrast to the bustling terminal. Quiet, climate-controlled, with large windows overlooking the runways where planes took off and landed in a carefully choreographed dance. Seated around a conference table were 3 more executives, including an older man, whose name badge identified him as the Airport Operations Director. After introductions, Patricia began with another apology, but David held up his hand. Before we go further, I'd like my daughters to speak. They're the ones who experienced this firsthand. Surprised but pleased, Zara and Zuri collected their thoughts. They had always been taught that their voices mattered, and now they had an audience that needed to hear them. Zara went first, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. We followed every instruction on your website for teen travelers. We had all the documentation. We arrived early. But the gate agent Thomas didn't even really look at our papers. He just saw us and decided we weren't getting on that plane. Zuri picked up seamlessly where her sister left off. And it wasn't just us. We noticed other black families being pulled aside for random screenings. We have it all on video. This isn't about one bad employee or one mistake. It's about a pattern. The executives shifted uncomfortably as David played the video the twins had recorded. The evidence was clear. Several instances of different treatment based on appearance, all within the span of 30 minutes at the same terminal. When the video ended, Patricia broke the silence. This is completely unacceptable. Thomas has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. That's a start, David acknowledged. But it's not enough. The Airport Operations Director leaned forward. What else are you suggesting, Mr. Johnson? David glanced at his daughters, then back to the executives. My investment firm holds 17% of TransGlobal Holdings shares. That gives me certain influence. But today, I'm not speaking as an investor. I'm speaking as a father whose daughters were treated unfairly, and as someone who believes your company can and should do better. He laid out a series of demands: a complete audit of boarding procedures at all Skyway terminals, mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, clear and public guidelines for document verification that would be applied equally to all passengers, and a transparent reporting system for travelers who experience discrimination. Additionally, David continued, I want these changes tied to executive compensation. If discrimination incidents go down, bonuses go up. Give your leadership team a financial incentive to take this seriously. The room fell silent as the executives processed his demands. Finally, Patricia spoke. We can implement these changes, but it will take time. You have 2 weeks to present an implementation plan to your board. David replied firmly. I'll be at that meeting. One of the other executives, a younger man who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. And if we refuse? David's expression remained calm, but his voice took on a steel edge. Then by this time tomorrow, my firm will have divested every share we hold in TransGlobal, and I'll be explaining to every business news outlet exactly why. I'll also be contacting the Department of Transportation about launching a formal investigation. The threat hung in the air, its weight unmistakable. But then, unexpectedly, Zuri spoke up. This isn't about punishment, she said, her young voice somehow cutting through the tension. It's about making things better. We still want to visit Paris someday. We still want to fly Skyway. We just want everyone to have the same chance to do those things, no matter what they look like. Zara nodded in agreement. If you fix this, you won't just be helping us, you'll be helping yourselves too. Their words, free from the corporate maneuvering of the adults in the room, seemed to reach the executives in a way their father's financial threats couldn't. Patricia looked at the twins with newfound respect. You're right. And we will fix this. She turned to David. Your daughters will be on the next flight to Paris, upgraded to first class, and we'll have that implementation plan ready in 1 week, not 2. David shook his head. The trip will have to wait for another time. My daughters have school tomorrow, and I think we've all had enough excitement for one weekend. He glanced at the twins, who nodded in understanding, though with visible disappointment. But we'll be watching for that implementation plan. They left the office, The airport operations director approached them privately. "Thank you," he said quietly, surprising them. "I've been trying to address these issues from inside for years. Sometimes it takes outside pressure to create real change." Walking back through the terminal, Zuri turned to her father. "Did you know your investment company owned part of the airline?" David nodded. "I did. But money only matters when you use it to stand for something important. Today you two showed me what's really important." Zara smiled up at him. "Paris can wait. This was better than any vacation." 6 months passed quickly. Summer came and went, and autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and red. For Zara and Zuri Johnson, life had mostly returned to normal: school, debate team practices, weekend shifts at their aunt's bakery, and planning for college applications that would start next year. But today wasn't a normal day. Today they sat in the back seat of their father's car as it pulled up to Skyway Airlines headquarters, a gleaming glass building that reflected the clouds above like a mirror. "Nervous?" their father asked, catching their eyes in the rearview mirror. Zuri shook her head, beads clicking softly in her braids. "Not nervous, just weird to be here as advisors instead of just passengers." Zara nodded in agreement, adjusting the collar of her blazer. At 16, the twins were now the youngest members of Skyway's newly formed Passenger Equity Committee, a group created as part of the changes their father had demanded 6 months ago. "Just remember," David told his daughters as they walked toward the entrance, "your experiences and perspectives matter. That's why you're here." Inside, the corporate atmosphere was immediately apparent: polished floors, modern furniture, people moving with purpose. A receptionist greeted them warmly and directed them to a conference room on the 23rd floor. The room was already half full when they arrived. Around a large oval table sat airline executives, customer service representatives, and civil rights advocates. Patricia Reynolds, now promoted to Executive Vice President of Customer Experience, stood to welcome them. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce David Johnson and his daughters, Zara and Zuri. As most of you know, their experience earlier this year was the catalyst for many of the changes we're implementing." The twins took their seats, feeling the weight of attention but also a sense of purpose. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about making sure what happened to them wouldn't happen to others. Patricia began the meeting by sharing some preliminary results from the past 6 months. Since implementing our new boarding procedure guidelines, customer complaints related to document verification have decreased by 68%. Our staff diversity training program has now reached 92% of frontline employees, and we've created an independent review board for any discrimination complaints. Slides appeared on the wall-mounted screen, showing statistics and feedback. But the most compelling slide was simply a collection of quotes from passengers and employees. The new verification process is actually faster and feels more consistent. For the first time in my career, I feel like I have clear guidelines to follow. My family travels frequently, and we've noticed a real difference in how we're treated at Skyway counters. As the presentation continued, Zuri leaned toward her sister and whispered, "They're actually doing it. They're making real changes." The meeting progressed to discussion about next steps. The airline was planning to extend the new procedures to all their partner airlines, ensuring consistent treatment across connections and code shares. They were also developing a passenger rights pamphlet that would be available at every check-in counter and on their website. When it was time for committee feedback, Zara raised her hand. Despite her usual shyness in group settings, her voice was clear and confident. "The numbers look promising, but I'd like to hear more about what happens when the procedures aren't followed. What accountability measures are in place?" Patricia nodded appreciatively at the question. "Excellent point. We've implemented a 3-strike policy for employees who don't follow the new guidelines. First incident triggers additional training, second requires a supervisor review, and third may result in termination, depending on the circumstances." The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from staff training modules to passenger feedback mechanisms. The twins contributed thoughtfully throughout, drawing on their own experience but also thinking beyond it. considering how different travelers might face different challenges. Near the end of the meeting, an unexpected visitor joined them. The CEO of Transglobal Holdings, Skyway's parent company. A tall man with salt and pepper hair, he stood at the head of the table with a serious expression. "I wanted to come down and see this committee in action myself," he explained. "The work you're doing here has implications beyond just Skyway. It's creating a blueprint for all our transportation subsidiaries." He turned specifically to the twins. "Young ladies, I understand your spring break trip to Paris was postponed because of what happened. I'd like to offer you and your family an all-expenses-paid trip whenever you're ready to go." The offer hung in the air for a moment. 6 months ago, it would have seemed like an amazing resolution, a dream trip restored. But now Zara and Zuri exchanged a look, their twin connection allowing them to reach the same conclusion simultaneously. "That's very generous," Zuri replied politely. "But we'd prefer if you took those resources and put them toward expanding the training program to include airport security personnel as well. They're often the first point of contact for travelers, and they need the same guidelines." The CEO looked surprised, then impressed. "Consider it done." After the meeting concluded, a reporter from the travel industry press approached the twins in the hallway. The committee's work had begun generating attention throughout the airline industry, with other carriers looking to adopt similar measures. "Do you feel like justice has been served?" the reporter asked, recorder in hand. Zuri considered the question carefully. "This isn't about justice for us," she replied. "It's about creating a system that's fair for everyone." Zara nodded in agreement. 6 months ago, we were just two girls excited about seeing the Eiffel Tower. Now we're part of something much bigger. As they walked back to their father's car, David put an arm around each of his daughter's shoulders. "You know what amazes me most," he said. "How you've turned something painful into something powerful. You could have just taken the first-class tickets they offered that day and moved on." "We learned from you, Dad," Zara replied. "You always say that real change doesn't come from quick fixes." In the parking lot, they passed a family with luggage heading toward the shuttle to the airport, parents with 2 young children, excitement evident on their faces. The mother was going through a checklist, making sure they had everything for their trip. "That was us 6 months ago," Zuri observed quietly. "And now, because of what happened to us, their trip might be a little easier," Zara added. Back at home that evening, the twins sat on their bedroom floor, surrounded by travel brochures. The Paris trip was back on the planning table for next summer, but now they were thinking beyond just one destination. "What about adding London?" Zuri suggested, flipping through a glossy booklet. "Or Amsterdam? Why not both?" Their mother asked from the doorway, smiling at her daughters. She'd heard all about the meeting from their father. "I'm so proud of you two." "For missing our trip?" Zara asked with a small laugh. Their mother shook her head. "For understanding that sometimes the journey matters more than the destination." Later that night, as Zuri was scrolling through her phone, she came across a news article about changes in the airline industry. Skyway's new policies were mentioned prominently, along with a photo of the Passenger Equity Committee, including her and Zara sitting at the conference table, looking professional and purposeful. The article quoted an industry expert. "What began as an individual case of discrimination has sparked what might be the most significant customer service overhaul in aviation in the past decade." Zuri showed the article to her sister, who was sketching the Eiffel Tower in her art journal, still dreaming of the trip they would eventually take. "You know what Dad always says," Zuri remarked. "Real power isn't about privilege, it's about how you use your voice to create change when it matters most." Zara nodded, adding final touches to her drawing. "And sometimes it takes missing a flight to start a journey that really matters."